Guys, welcome back to another conversation with a good guest. This is our series where we just talk with people that we talk to all the time, but we say it's a conversation with them, so it feels formal and less formal at the same time. It's me, Africans. We have our Canadian footy guy, Keeper Saves. Sir, you have too many podcasts and different affiliations
No,
to
no,
know what
no,
to,
no,
to
no.
attach to.
It's
It's tough.
it, it, it's pretty much just Canadian footy guy on for it depends on the season. Let's focus on right now the EPL is going on, so I'm part of the 6 Yard Line podcast.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
technically, yes, TFC is here,
Hmm.
and you can find me on the Tunnel Club, our post game show on Twitter/X
Yes.
Spaces, but you know other things I'm working on, long term, I'll just be more producing than kind of being in front of the camera. So we'll see how things develop with that because it's been on hold for the past few weeks.
Yeah.
Potentially coming back, but we'll see.
Indeed, indeed, we will. But again, it's the middle of the season. We have seasons that have begun. MLS, EPL is going as it is. As you know, my Wolves are we're wolving, but that's okay.
Hey,
We'll
you got an important 3 points on the weekend, so you have to take that. I won't make you feel too bad with regard to how my team's doing. So,
I
um, yeah.
every year I'm in a relegation battle, so I'm holding on to the stress. The stress is natural to me, so I see it tonight and I live that life. But yeah, so EPL is going on. MLS season just started, which I mean, depending on
Yes.
who you're supporting, who you're looking at. Then we have the NSL that's coming up in a few weeks. It feels like I say a few weeks, but it'll what less than a month, less than a month.
No, 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 no. It's a month and a half.
Okay, perfect. All the schedules are
Mid-April.
mid-April is when they open up, and
Yeah.
that'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on and kind of go with you. I know you're involved fully, kind of with the support. Oh, no, okay,
Well, no, let's not. I'll give you some. I'm not. I've chosen not to
okay,
sign up as a full-time supporter group member, just because I just don't have the time or commitment.
fair enough.
Um, as you said, I'm wearing enough hats with regard to this side of it.
Yeah,
I just realized I just can't that's just too much for me.
hmm,
Um, so they're growing. They're doing a great job. They will be probably a massive voice for the AFC Toronto throughout the season. But I anticipate, you know, loud, cheerful voices, especially home. The first game, which will be at BMO Field.
yeah,
Um, I plan on being there. I don't
okay,
know where I'll be sitting, because I again, with not being in the sports group, I think I'll pass on sitting in that section. I think I there's times where I actually miss sitting on the sidelines where I can
mm.
watch the game and just be a fan and not have to always be the voice trying to, you know what I mean?
No, I get that. I when it comes to going and watching, I'm someone who give me the highest seat I can see and just give me the best view of everything. I just like to observe. I've had my days where you're in a supporter section, and don't get me wrong, I can keep that energy up. I can do it. I don't mind not being able to speak for a week afterwards, but I am just it's the weird combination of being a very extroverted person, but then also sometimes just wanting to be like, let me just sit over here and watch everything and just kind of be over
You know,
here. And if people notice me, cool. If they don't notice me, I'm not mad. But then, so I get it. I get that aspect of it. And you gotta give yourself breaks from everything, right? But you support when you can. Kind of going through it as we go. Now, let's talk a little NSL here. I think where we are, and I kind of had this conversation with Woso North on a pod which is on the channel. If you guys want to check it out, feel free to do so. But the league where it is, we had a few interesting conversations. I almost want to bring them up here as we kind of lead our way through to some points we want to get to, right? it's interesting when we look at how women's sports has changed on the North American landscape, right? The big thing this year is no drafts, right? So it almost feels like a Wild West approach where people and players can sign where they want to. They can it becomes more so about the club selling for players and stuff. But one of the points that I got to in that conversation with Woso North is just the idea of you'll recruit what you know because that is what you are most familiar with, right? So we were talking about it in the context of the NSL. Like, will it be a problem that there's no draft because you don't have people finding players for you? And the point that I brought up was, well, not this. I said the league will be symptomatic of the current landscape of the sport in the country because a lot of the times we are very linear in how we look for talent, right? We look at our national teams. 90% of the players came from a national development center, right? Which means if you get there, you have a chance to be seen. That's how the tiered system here works. Now, when we're looking at the NSL as a league, part of me kind of looked and said, I figured there'll be probably growing pains and there'll be versions of that and there'll be symptoms of that kind of coming through. When you look at the league as a whole, I mean, you're going to be supporting it from the outside. We'll be supporting it from the outside as well. Uh, what do you see in terms of the roster construction? What excites you? What are the concerns you have in that sense?
Um, I guess one of the each team's roster construction is interesting how they're going about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether it be locally, whether it be finding gems from different markets, that, whether it's surprising that this team didn't go after this player versus, this team picking them up, vice versa. There was a lot of that. Surprising on the it seems when it comes to the international market, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there are some Americans, but there's uh, I guess like what an Icelandic feel to a lot of the players that have come in, and an
Mm-hmm.
Asian feel to the players that have come in. Um, of course, it's year one. You know, how deep is the scouting availability? Um, there's going to be markets that they aren't able to hit in this first season. Probably one of the reasons why there is no draft.
Yeah.
And let's be real, draft is more of a North American thing than an actual soccer thing, right? So
Uh-huh.
maybe it's they don't see a immediate benefit of going that route in year one. Let them give themselves to establish themselves, and going into maybe next season it could be something that they choose to do. So it's interesting again when it comes to the roster construction. Um, we see there's a lot of, I don't know what the number is, but I'm sure I believe League One Ontario, there's a strong contingent of players from teams throughout that have been given opportunity in this league,
Mm-hmm.
which is good to see from a quote unquote local perspective. Um, and then, we'll see what happens, right? We'll see how competitive some of these, because I think there's also a difference within, how young some teams have gone versus others.
Mm-hmm.
The type of experience that some teams have gone with, when it comes to even, for example, players with national pedigree, right? Toronto has, like, for example, Reagan, who is with our national team right now.
Yep.
She's with, a young national team player versus you've got some of the other teams with maybe players that were part of the past, or the most recent past at least, right? So it'll be interesting.
No, I think that's fair. Again, even roster construction is fascinating. I think when we looked at the rosters initially, I figured teams would try to go more, and I figured all the national development centers would be rated. That was my thought. I figured they're going to try to make a run of these players, and you saw a few, like you saw Kaylee Hunter sign. She signed in Toronto, which raised a few eyebrows to some folks. Were like, but you could have been in Vancouver. I mean, hey, I'm not mad. You're there. Good for you. But I think that was always a surprise. I think AFC Toronto just signed a Nigerian player today. They just made that official, who was on the thing, and the name has already left my mind because ADHD is a thing. But I, it's, I wonder. Again, you bring up the idea of scouting, and I always bring up the scouting that you're always going to go back. I always say when you're in high stress or whenever you go to things, you always go back to your default mechanism. You always go back to what you know, what's familiar to you. And so I look at the composition of, say, like the league, and I wonder, and this comes down to an overall conversation with it, which is what do we expect them to be? I think they'll have to figure out what their identity is. I know Diana Matheson has talked about wanting this league to be a league that can compete with the big leagues in the world and do that, which by all means you want to do that. I do wonder if it morphs into maybe in a few years more so of that CPL where it's not necessarily a feeder league per se, but I don't know.
I don't know. That's they will do whatever it takes not to fall in. Like the
Yeah.
CPL. Here's what hurt the CPL is that there was already 3 Canadian teams that
Mhm.
were in a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? Like at the
Yes.
end of the day, the women's game is not as financially deep pockets as the men's game, right? So you have in the women's league maybe 3, 4 really financially viable options for players to, full-time career-wise, right?
Yeah.
And the NSL's goal is to be able to be one of those teams,
Okay.
or sorry, one of those leagues,
One of
right?
those, yeah.
The CPL was not able and is still not able to turn around and try to compete on that financial stage.
Mhm.
Can't compare the two. You can't even look at them. It's like apples to oranges. It's two different animals, right? And they that isn't an issue. Um, I think year one, they have to play it safe at the same time. They
True.
can't just try to go too far one way, or because who you want again. This is a long term vision, right?
Yeah.
And they never said that they want to compete right away and have the best players playing here, but they want this to be a viable option in 2 to 3 years where players are like, yeah, you know what, maybe playing here is better than going to Europe or playing in the NWSL, right?
Mhm.
It will be an option, and that's their goal. Um, so yeah, I don't think it's something that needs to be a concern.
Fair. That's fair. That's more than fair. Um, it. I think I look at this league interestingly, especially from again where its future could be, and there's exciting aspects about this. If you're a young girl in this country, you see this. It's finally an option that you can come and you can play in your own nation. That's great. I think of my if you didn't know this, I'm an uncle. So I am an uncle who apparently my niece loves me. So I did something well. Suck it, sis. So outside of that, I think about her in this context where it's like, okay, you are well, she's tri-national at this point. But if she wanted to become an athlete, because she's a bit of an adrenaline junkie, um, could she come and look at this league and say, okay, I want to play in Canada, maybe in the future, and that, and look at and say, are there people that say look like me? Are there people who I can see myself in terms of those role models, which is a bit of a loaded question in a sense because it's like I'm asking people to be role models at this point who are starting their professional journeys, fair or not. But I look at the league and I ponder that, and I ponder that from that context because we right we have our heroes right when we grew
Right.
up we had our heroes we had that, but now it's this next generation of players and it's like yes, could my niece look at the Canadian national team and be like, I see all these girls, I want to play like them because I want to be a cool soccer player like them? Yes. Can she do that when she looks at the league? That is the question for me, and I guess fairly or not, we look at this league in year one, which a part of me wants to say, let them learn how to crawl and walk before I criticize their running. And at the same breath, I also want to say, I want to also like make a note that this is what our landscape currently is in terms of the sport in the country, right? And so how do
Well,
you balance that? How should I balance that?
I think you and I've had discussions on this, and I think there's a bigger issue, not that you won't be able to, I guess, put on the shoulders of the league solely,
Yeah.
because a lot of, you know, there's a lot of players of soccer's extremely diverse when it comes to, culture, right?
Yeah.
In this, especially in this country, but we can speak on the greater the GTA or Ontario as a whole,
Mhm.
because of how diverse it is, right?
Yeah.
But there's definitely a drop off as you get older, with a lot of women within the Black community that tend to walk away from the sport and lose that desire to go on to the next level. Now, not to say that there are a lot, because you can go look at our U17 or U20 teams that are playing,
Yeah.
right? Even within our national team, right? Um, but there is a slight disconnect
Mhm.
within at some point. And again, this is just from an outsider looking in. I have no direct knowledge. I'm no longer as involved within local soccer anything, right?
Mhm.
This past summer it was me on the sideline watching my grandkids play versus anything else. So I'm no longer, involved in any refereeing, any coaching, or any of that aspect. And I rarely play anymore. So, that I don't really have a lot of direct knowledge, but I've noticed even people who say, kids I know who've kind of, the boys will still be playing, but the girls have kind of faded away and
Yeah.
chose other interests. Um, and maybe not even in necessarily any specific sport. But yeah, um, there is one thing I think the league, I was disappointed
Mhm.
and very disappointed. It is year one, and I get all that. Um, and I think I've definitely voiced this with you. February 1st came, and February is basically done, right? A few more
Yeah.
days. And there was no acknowledgement from the league or specifically AFC Toronto with regard to Black History Month,
Mhm.
right? And that was something that I felt very disappointing in. And these are the things that the community and people sometimes notice and feel there's the disconnect.
Mhm.
Feel that, yeah, and I'm not saying that's any reason behind it, but
Yeah.
subtle, certain subtle, you notice these subtle things and you kind of just question, right? Again, people are gonna say it's year one, yada yada yada. Uh, to me, that's something that I've grown up always hearing from school to so on and so
Mhm.
forth. That it's really, how can you try to tell me there's no one within that organization or from top to bottom of end of the league that didn't know what month it was?
Mhm.
So is there an issue? I won't say there's an issue, but I think it's something that, from a youth level, that hopefully in the future with
Yeah.
with a league that's local, with because it's not as if there aren't players of color within this league that on AFC Toronto there are,
Mhm.
and there will continue to be in the future hopefully, but it'll be important that you know they hopefully they do take up those role model roles. And it sounds like they will be, right, with different things that they'll be doing with community, with kids, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
only time will tell.
Mhm. No, and to echo it a bit, like it almost sometimes feels like it's a conversation that we had. We were the conversation that was around, like, say, like the women's team, around at least my circles. We were always having that conversation, even on the men's team. It's like, when do you bring in new players? right? And it's always like well, now's not the time because such and such is coming. Well, if you keep on saying now's not the time, eventually the time will never be, because there's always going to be something. You have to be intentional with it. And again, like you said, right? I think the little things will always matter in anything that happens and growing the game, because as a league and as a community, like we always look to find places where, not to say that we belong, but at least we're welcomed, even as simple as just acknowledging that this is something that is happening, right? I will sometimes mock people who be like, okay, corporation XYZ puts up the happy Black History Month for these people. And I'm someone, you know me. It's not that I don't want to have Black History Month conversations. It's like, let's just acknowledge people as people all the time type of a thing. But I think there's value, there's importance to it. And we see when you make an effort, right? It may not be, we're not asking you to show up and say, hi guys, I made this, whatever, or cultural food. It's okay. Stay off the food for now. But like, we acknowledge and we see when you put in effort, and we put in that effort as well. And the little things, like you say, it's never
Well,
always, yeah.
and I guarantee there will be other things that'll come up and you will see effort put out from this league. And that will be my point, is that, okay, if you're going to put effort out for this, why can't you put a little effort out for a tweet?
Hmm. And
Is it,
yeah.
and we can talk on that about this when that happens, because I guarantee it will happen.
Mhm.
And I will be able to point out the minor hypocrisy. But I again, I've as I've allowed, because I had this talk from literally first couple of days of the month, and I've
Yeah.
allowed myself to simmer down and kind of just not. um eh, I'm just I said, I when I do say my piece, I'm going to be very minimal with what I have to say and not be over dramatic.
Yeah. And I think it's fair just to point it out in the same way that, again, it's always the moments that matter. And I think you have to acknowledge, just make the effort, right? It's something that I always say with everything. Just be intentional about it, right? That's all I'll ask, right?
Yeah,
We're not going to save the world today, but be intentional about where you put your importance, because we all see, right? I think
yeah,
there's a,
definitely.
yeah. And like, yeah, so that'll be interesting to see. Do you,
Now,
yeah, talk to me.
are you going to the home opener? Taking your niece?
My niece is in Australia. She is not. She has no chance of coming up for that. But I
Okay.
I have a group of local soccer players I that we have talked about going up for it. And so it's in the works. It's very much plausible that we find ourselves there. So I'm probably leaning 60-40 being there. And I think it'll be good. I haven't had a bad experience. I'm curious to see what
It's a
it'll look like,
Saturday afternoon. How are you not coming down to Toronto? It's not late.
because it's
Even
Saturday
my
afternoon.
my okay, my sister who lives around 2 hours away, or if we were to say from BMO Field, at least 2.5 hours away,
Mhm.
right? She's coming down for the game,
Okay, so now you're just putting me on blast. There's no way I can't go now. So yeah, I'm
right? And I should mind you, remember, I'm a grandpa and it's my older sister. So you're young lad, you need to be able to show up, bro.
I,
Because
I this episode's getting posted in May now, so that they don't know. So they don't know. He called me
but
young and full of life. He said I have no excuses. Unbelievable. No, but I'm excited. I honestly am excited to see games like whenever they have. I want to get out to that game, but then also get out to York Lions Stadium and see some games there as well. Because again, why not? Like I got a couple kids who are just fullbacks who are like, I just want to watch soccer. I'm like, dude, I'm with you. Let's
it's
go.
the sad reality is there's still people that are wanting, complaining on the location and saying, "Oh, I'm not going at York." Like, why can't they play? Like, it's and you and I've had this conversation on facilities in the city. I mean, and not just you and I. I've had this conversation on facilities with so many people and the lack of proper soccer facilities.
Yeah.
Right? Like people say, why can't you play at varsity? Well, those football lines are permanent. Next, land court. It's not up to par to play any professional sport.
Mhm.
They need to renovate that. like the concessions, the stand. Like there's so much work that needs to be done there.
Yeah.
Rumor has it that they do have intentions. I don't know. We'll see what happens in a few years. But for now, York is a viable option. With what you know, it's not to me. I wish there were if there was something bigger that could hold
Yeah.
like 6 to 8 thousand, had stands on both sides. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, them go having the home opener at BMO Field is a big deal. Um, don't expect too many of those games there, unfortunately.
It's a tough facility to share. I get it, but still.
It's well, I think well, as it timing, right? Like even first of all, there's no way it's not even just sheer, it's a cost factor, right? Like
Yeah.
if you see the map for the tickets for that game, you'll see kind of why not every seat's available, even in the lower bowl.
Yeah.
They're only making a certain amount of availability. I mean, if the demand increases, they'll probably open up more seats, right? But
Hmm.
the point is the costs for concession or to hire people and all that, and how much of it does the team get? How much is MLSE keeping for themselves? Who's staffing it? It's going to be MLS staff, so that means they're going to want to take most of the concession costs,
Hmm.
right? So, like, you're basically renting something that you're not making a lot of money returning in return,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I'm sure the cost at York is a lot cheaper. But again, to have that as the home opener, the second highlight of the league, having the first one in Vancouver, then this one, I think that's a great way for them to kick off.
No, definitely, definitely. I think, I mean, facilities, league. We all know the issues that the country has in terms of soccer specific facilities, let alone those solid medium. Like to me, we've had this conversation. This country needs more like 8 to 12,000 person stadiums that are available because I think that's the medium spot where it's intimate enough but big enough to be a good atmosphere. And money is the thing. I mean, that's why we look at something like Kingston, which is curious with what they're trying to do with like CPL aspect. And I messaged you, and I was like, and we were like, that should be get both teams. You have two tenants, you're ready
Well,
to go.
so I've been hearing some rumors, and I mean I have no way to know if this is true, but there's some essentially you're not going to ever well in the near future you're not going to see an owner for both NSL team and like one owner who owns both an NSL and a CPL team.
That makes. I mean, I'm not surprised by that notion, but
And that's like there's it boils down to the whole CPL's launch,
yeah,
CSB,
yeah,
once like the whole drama over that and disappointing um because like I've always said, if I was a multimillionaire and got hooked up with a bunch of super rich people and I said, "Hey, let's do this." There's only one way I'm going, and I'm having both. And I don't want, you know, some animosity preventing me from having to somebody else's animosity preventing me from, growing the game the way it should be grown.
yeah. No, that's and like it's the thing that keeps on coming up. Even when I look at say things like on the League One side, where I'm like, I see the limitations, but I support local and I want this to succeed, but I also can see what the limitations of this could be. It's it can be frustrating as a fan because you're saying like, why can't we just have all these things? But at the same time, it goes there.
League One should not be a semi-pro. It should be an amateur thing, and you need something in between CPL like you need like an actual professional, but a lower level professional below that
Yes.
for those bigger areas that want to kind of have that vibe,
Hmm.
and then League One can be a true feeder system to, that way CPL can start to push away from being a development league and
Mm,
to be more of a fully full flight professional league, right?
yeah.
Um, and maybe you could eventually look at having regional based leagues across the nation so that you have the CPL, and you have maybe 10 teams in the CPL. Really, that's good enough for the country. And then every region has their own second division type league that's a regional base so that it reduces travel cost,
Do
right?
you think
And
yeah, keep going. Sorry. Yeah, ADHD is kicking
yeah, I
in.
think sometimes I have too much time on my hands and I think too deeply about this stuff. But again, all this boils down to like people just one day woken up and realized, you know, we could do this in this country. I'm going to take my money and I'm going to invest in soccer. And you're
Mhm.
going to hit like that regional league could be built off of a 4 to 5,000 seat stadium in small little local Brentford, Ontario. Like
Mhm.
you don't have to have the provision of like, we don't need to be CBL. We can be a little smaller. We're a smaller community.
I agree with that.
Mm.
I think ever since I started podcasting and YouTubing, my thought was like the CPL can be here. You need another. I think that was my first like argument with someone online where I was like, you need a league below that, but not League One. And people were like, why? League One teams are showing them like it's not the point, it's the viability, it's the steps, it's the stages. You need that space to allow the players to
Yeah.
kind of get their reps in. And if you were living in that quote unquote perfect pro rel world, you need another league. You need another league there if you were trying to build that as well, because there's no way
Yeah.
that a CPL team is going to say, yeah, sure, we get relegated. And by no means insult to the team, but I'm just picking up like, oh, by all means, yeah, York United, they'll finish last, and then we'll play Roma next year. They're not going to agree
Yeah.
to that.
Well, the reason Canada, this is what here's one of the thing I'll say about pro relegation in this country. It's a lot harder because of we're such we would have to have a lot more teams at a senior level and a lot of because you see how travel is already in this country,
Mhm.
right? There's rumor that CPL is looking in a few years to have, an East and West division to reduce some of the travel costs, right?
Yeah,
Because and that's one of the reasons why it's a lot harder to have pro because again with traveling it's not like it's a 2 hour drive or 2 hour like or say 5 hours is the longest distance between any team in the league
yeah.
or 8 hours,
Mhm.
right? That would be if you could if that's how small we were where we could say 8 hours was the longest drive you could easily have a promotion relegation type league but it won't work otherwise. We're
Yeah.
too big, so you almost have to have just regional divisions that there are rewards for winning your league, right? And you can have aspirations from those smaller leagues to eventually but you have to have as you're looking to move up, you have to meet certain stadium requirements,
Agreed. Which is why you need that
right?
space. But I
And
mean, yeah,
so, anyways, that conversation is a conversation for another day because again,
yeah.
that's more as a pipe dream than any form of reality.
It's true. I will say, like on that point, distance and thing, I think it's an indictment, I think, a bit to the CPL that you had an upstart league be able to get a team in Quebec, have a stadium situation figured out for year one, and they're going to have that going. And meanwhile, the CPL is BC teams,
Kicking their heels,
Alberta teams,
kicking their heels.
yep, Ontario teams, Halifax. It's like
Yeah.
you need that team to connect it to cut down the travel.
Well,
Why is Halifax
he,
everyone's home opener?
here's the problem. You're also have at the rate things are going, you're going to have at least two more teams in the province of Ontario before you have a team in Quebec.
Which is it's bad.
Makes no sense. Makes
Yeah,
no sense because they're already basically predicting the next three teams are Kelowna, um, Windsor, and
possibly
uh,
Kingston.
Kingston.
Yeah,
And you're right. Like, how is there not? But it boils down to somebody's someone pissed somebody off in Quebec, and right because how's there not somebody in um what's the region just outside of in Quebec? Is it Trois Rivières?
Trois
Just
Rivières
across the
or
border?
Laval or yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking right across the border from Ottawa.
Ottawa Hall,
There's
Montreal, Trois-Rivières. Let's go with Trois-Rivières, even though it's a little bit further out. But yeah,
there's a city right across. I can't remember, but like it's big enough that they could have a team. Um, in Quebec, right? Like so that you could have a natural rivalry. Then you could go look at like in so many regions, even outside of Montreal. You don't have to be in Montreal.
yeah,
There's a hot like the biggest miss is the fact that there's such a hotbed of talent in that
yes,
province
agreed,
that need to be highlighted in a higher stage than League One Quebec,
agreed.
right? So I I don't know what has hurt. Like if it is the expansion fee that they're looking for, like you're not that big of a league. Don't be greedy.
Hmm. No, I think it'd be imperative for them to do it because you cut down so much on the travel costs because it's like half of the country, then nothing else that bridges. Like I don't know why they didn't even effort. I mean, Blue Cross Stadium in Moncton is sitting there, 10,000 capacity. I know people may not want to go there. I get it, but it's a stadium. It's
No, but
there.
I don't disagree that there should be at least conversations with having a minimum of one more team in Atlantic Canada at least,
Agreed.
because I believe you can have 2 to 3. I think there should be able to somebody with hockey ties, former NHL players. Maybe you need to go look at having a team in Dartmouth so that you have that rivalry for Halifax, right?
Yeah.
Because you're big enough. That's the thing is, if you do it right and you do something similar to what Halifax did, it can work.
Agreed.
You can go to markets that don't really have anything else going on in the summer.
Mhm. And I
Why are you
think that
still
would be
coming
great.
in? Yeah, right. Anyways, that enough of that CPL
We
because
yes.
truthfully, yeah,
We can
um,
go for years on that. But you mentioned talent that's able to that is untapped talent. Is this like a TFC thing where you succeed when you leave the club? Because I just saw Jaden Nelson have a great debut. Schaffelberg's doing his thing.
Soul Jade Nelson, TFC sold Jade Nelson's off
They
to Europe,
did.
where they
They
got the
did.
best out of him, and it was a time where, in an ideal world, they should have sold Shaquille at that same time, when there was a bit of want because based on the guys that they had there, they weren't in their current plans.
Yeah.
And it really boils down to where Toronto made the mistake was bringing in the Italians, right? If they had gone a different route, um, you would have probably seen a better development from both of those two players,
Hmm.
where we would have been able to reap a lot more out of them in a sale. Um, because I think you would have saw because Jaden was showing promise,
He
and
was.
so was Jaquil, but Jaquil just wasn't like last year. He just wasn't going to get the playing time he needed,
Yeah.
and it really hurt him and hurt. And the club has admitted they screwed that one up, right?
That they did.
Um, and I think there's a lot of all indications is you know there is a shift in the type of players they're looking at. An honest effort to that if they're going to bring up one of their young players, he's going to be given time to play,
Yes.
time to make mistakes and learn from it. Not, oh, you screwed up. That's it. There's your one and done, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. So I'm not overly like I'm not going to be like I know there's going to be people that can be look what Jaden's doing. Well, technically, from a club's perspective, they made money off of that player. They sold him
True.
off to Europe. Things maybe he wasn't getting the playing time. New coach, I don't know what happened, but he ended up coming back to North America. Obviously, there were no conversations with Toronto. And maybe you know what? Again, TFC is just moving in a different direction, right?
Yeah.
Who knows? Good on him. Because when you're looking at it from a national team's perspective, um, it's another option on the wing. Um, I saw somebody tweet, where they think he'd be starting. Like, slow down. He had one game. Like,
I
You know, I think there's other players that are ahead of him on the pecking order.
Hmm.
So let's wait and see what happens. You know, like especially when you have such a big provisional roster, like there's a couple tournaments this summer. Well, there's
Exactly.
the Nations League and then there's the Gold Cup. Like there's going
Yeah.
to be players that some teams will be like, all right, you can have this player here, but you're not going to get him for that one. And, um, different players may be given an opportunity. And since we're talking about the national team, we've got a few new call ups, which is kind of, I don't want to say shock people. I think people are seeing. Let's start with the first one, Promise David. That's the one where I'm glad we got because he's been showing like well, again, he's not in a big league or on a big team, right? But he's
Mhm.
still scoring goals
Yes.
consistently. And outside of Jonathan David, let's be real, we haven't had a lot of our players doing scoring consistently in Europe.
Especially nines.
Um,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So that's and I think Jesse's looking for that nine, right? I don't think he's sold on Kyle. And Tammy is a prospect. I think he's got a lot of talent, but he's not hasn't played a lot of games,
Mhm.
both for club. And so he had another year. So like, I don't think that you want to have to rely on him if you're going into a World Cup. A player like Promise David shows a lot of opportunity. Ike Ukbo seems to be a totally phased out of the picture, so you have to again add another attacking option.
Mhm.
I'll be honest with you, I don't, I haven't seen enough of Jepson play
Mhm.
because I didn't really pay attention when he was out on loan. He's been recalled by the Cherries, Bournemouth, but
Yeah.
again, since he's been back, has he played a lot since he's been recalled?
He's got minutes. Like he's got because they've had a lot of injuries. So I check in on Bournemouth because Antoine Semenyo, who's plays for Ghana, is there. So I'm like, let me get this in. And so he's been there and he's looked lively when he's been given opportunities. I think there's so many thoughts people have on both players. And again, the thing we always have to caution is the World Cup isn't in 3 weeks, guys. Like we have a year and a few months where these players, if you're concerned about form, they can work their way into form. If you think you need competition, we have a year and change of competition to see these players push themselves. But I think the potential, because Daniel Jefferson, he scores in the Premier League when he's 17. And right there. So when they see that, we're like, oh, and he can play for Canada. Okay, cool. And then there was the flirtations of him going to the Gold Cup in 2022. He said because that was at the same time Hearn was trying to recruit him and Marcelo Flores at that point, and both those were the big things, and both said no, and that's fine. Promise David again is a nine who is scoring right now, and I think if you look at Jonathan David as that second striker, that roaming more of that 10 role, not the nine,
Mhm.
you need a nine that A can keep up with the pressing demands of Jesse Marsh, but then B also be clinical. Now, if you think Promise David is that person, give me the cousins, right? Give me all three cousins. Give me David, David, and Davies on the pitch. Let's have fun with confusing them. But I think you have time to build. It's the same way that you mentioned Jaden Nelson. Do I think he walks into the team and he starts over Schaffelberg? No. But I do think if I'll say this. I do think if you look at say that left side, can I do better than Jacob Schaffelberg? If I can, I would be remiss not to try to. Blah, 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 words.
Well, I'm expecting. I mean, if it's my pick on the wings, you have Tajon on one side and you have Ali Ahmed on the other.
I don't hate that idea. I don't hate it. And maybe because they just signed, sealed, delivered, Promise David and Daniel Jefferson, I'm like, hey, Kevin, if you could slip this envelope to Luca Coliosho maybe and see what he thinks. But like, maybe that's just where my
Okay,
mind is.
so
Yeah.
this is also where I have a little concern over chasing dual nationals, right? I want people who want to play for Canada first and foremost, not have to beg them to come for this project or to have to sell this to them, right? There should be some of these like a lot of these players should be honest with themselves and should be able to look at themselves and be like, I'm probably not in the future of this team or that country,
Mm.
right? A player like Jepson, I'm sorry, I don't think England has him in their senior vision,
I don't think so either.
at least anytime soon.
Not now.
And I think
Yeah.
he's starting to realize that, you know what, if I want to have any chance of playing in a World Cup, I think Canada might be a better option. I don't know you know, how we were able to get up, like, because Promise David probably would have an opportunity. But here's what I think: sometimes, depending on when it comes to if you're from an African country, um, and you might know this better, if you're not born and raised there, and you're African from outside, you're not often given the same value of talent over born Africans. And that's often the reason why a player will be like, you know, I'm going to play for Canada versus going to play there
I
where my
think
parents don't
I
live.
had a conversation with a Parisian Senegalese, Mo football, and we had a little bit of this talk. But I will say to this, I think the way that I don't think if Promise even went to play for Nigeria, Nigeria have more nines than some teams have quality talent. So it's like if he goes there, who is he going to? I think if
He's not.
you look at opportunity in Canada, you see Jonathan David, and then Kyle Larin in and out of form, Tani Oluwasi. And that's your striker three right now, right? Theo Bear hasn't been
Or
getting too
and
many
Theo Beer.
opportunities. And
No,
so like
looked half decent on the weekend, but yeah,
he did, yeah. But like if Promise goes to Nigeria, I mean Osimhen, right? Lookman, right?
fair enough, fair enough, fair. It's much different composition in that position. But I mean, wouldn't you say the same for Luca?
And see, this is where I disagree. I think if you're Luke or agree, depending on what your point is. I think if Luca looks at the left side of Canada.
No, I'm saying for like him thinking like, how much of a chance does he have to be with like the Italian national team? Here's what I think players need to remember.
Mhm.
Sometimes don't think the grass is greener on the other side, meaning like, well, it's Italy, it'd be better. Because prime example, um uh what's his name? Defender, used to play for Chelsea, he's now playing for is he with AC Milan? Um
What's our English Canadian boy,
Yes,
Tomori, yes,
yes,
Fikayo
yes,
Tomori, yes.
yes, tomorrow, right? He to me is good enough to play for England, right?
Oh, I agree.
But he had a falling out years back, or somebody just didn't see in him the talent that's there. Maybe when he was playing at Chelsea, and that like he was having some struggles, but he committed to England,
Yeah,
and he's probably never going to see another cap. And I mean, if he's content with those 3 caps that he's had, that's fine. But I mean,
mhm.
he's played or 5, or he's played too many that he can make a switch. I
Yeah,
think,
yeah. And I think
right?
for like, yeah, and every player isn't always going to be wired that way, right? Not every player is going to look and
Right.
say, I there's opportunity for you to play, but sometimes they're wired to say, I want to chase this
Now,
challenge,
part
and that's fine.
part of the problem is at that time when he was first like when he was given the opportunity to play for England. If you were to look at the Canadian team, there was not a lot of hope that we would even be going to a World Cup.
Mm,
Now is the time where players can actually say, all right, like especially with 20, like I'm pretty sure Jepson looked at that. All right, I may be able to be on in the next World Cup because I think he was angry that the last time he wasn't guaranteed a
mhm.
chance to be in the World Cup. He was like, you can earn a spot. I think this time he understands that he's matured more, but he looks at it as like, I think I can do it. Right? And I'd love if that's the case. I'll be happy. But again, I just don't want us overdoing it with chasing nationals because at the same time, I feel bad if we make somebody commit to Canada, we give them 1 or 2
True.
games, and then we drop them.
And that's a fair point. I think if you look at this year, right, you have Nations League, which probably will be a different roster you'll have than the Gold Cup, which I think because the Club World Cup is happening at that point, you're gonna have a little bit more of that mixing and
But
matching that. And I
yeah,
think, and like I've said it for a while, I figured that maybe they'll give the Gold Cup to be like, okay, maybe this is a Daniel Jebison Cup. This is your tournament, similar to what they did with Tejan 4 years ago. Oh, we're old. 4 years ago, however long it was, and then last year you saw like Schaffelberg and Jason Russell Rowe and Ali Ahmed break out. You give those tournaments and say, okay, you be in preseason, so either do that or you're here, get some reps, score some goals, get familiar with the system, and then we have a year of friendlies and some Nations League to figure out who is what. I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with building your depth because you
mhm.
want to have that depth because yes, you always want a strong unit. You want that cohesion. There's no doubt. But I mean, I'll go back to the left side, that left attacking side, right? Right now, the depth of it, I'll use Andrew Schaefer's thing. Like you have Jacob Schaffelberg. Ahmed is usually on the right. So if you assume Ahmed can go to the left, let's just keep Ahmed on the right.
Well,
Liam
I
Miller
think
is
Tajon can play on the left.
true, but let's just keep Tejan and Ali Aliman on the right for the point of this argument. Those two are on the right. They can battle out. You can always throw another one on the other side, yes. But after Jacob Schaffelberg, Liam Miller is injured, so he's a while back on recovery. And then
Technically, Jay Schaffelberg's injured right now.
okay, so Schaffelberg is injured as well. So on the left hand side, where's your depth, right? If I'm, and I'll try to put myself in Luca's shoes. If I'm Luca and I look at that and I say, Schaffelberg, Liam Miller. I mean, Liam Miller's playing in the championship. I'm in the championship. He's also injured though, so I'm mentioning we're all
Yeah,
talking about injured players. But give yourself depth so that when you get to these tournaments, like okay, now you guys can go play, see what your value is, and then we have a year to figure out who that final 23/26 is going to be.
yeah. No, well, there's going to be a lot of time to decide. And maybe between now and then, somebody out of the blue steps up and steals the spotlight.
Mhm.
Well, we can touch on them, closer to the next camp because there is a camp coming up.
Yes.
That our senior women's team are playing right now. Well, we've had basically all our women's teams play as of late.
There's
U17
so
and
much
U20 right
football. I
now.
can't keep up,
Um,
Sean.
our women's team. I've haven't been able to like sit there and watch minute by minute. Disappointing game against China. They were able to pull out the win against Mexico. What's your take so far of Stoney? Technically undefeated. Yeah, she is undefeated, not
She is
technically.
undefeated, a win and a draw. I think Stoney, I don't think I'll have a feel for her until a little bit later, probably the next window. Because I mean, the China game, the second half was just like I walked into these three games, and I'm saying I don't really care about the results. I want to learn something, right? And the thing that I've learned so far is CDM. CDM. We knew this. Emma Reagan, I think, has done, and Emma Reagan and Simia Wuja. Simia Wuja hasn't played yet. I think those two players have done more for their case there. I think my hottest take, just player wise, is I wonder what happens with Julie Grosso. I know she scored against China, but I think about if we go to a back three when Jade is healthy and Kadisha comes back, then you have Jade Revere on the wing backs with Ashley Lawrence, two midfielders, and then two attacking players and a striker. I don't know if there's room for because I think Reagan and Simi are your solid sixes. Quinn, when they come back, if they come back healthy, I think that's another option. I think the midfield is going to be fascinating for me to watch, and then
I I
them
think
figuring out
I
their
think
nine
Quinn's on.
situation.
I think Quinn's best days may have been May. You might see start to transition a new player there in that role.
It wouldn't surprise me because I think Reagan has done a good
Um,
job in their stead. But even if you eliminate Quinn, I think you look at the midfield, especially because Stoney has said like Ali Do is a 10 to her. So if she's a 10 to her, then you have the conversation of where do you, I think a lot of their play hinges on where they put Olivia Smith.
Yeah, and I want to see Olivia Smith in the off season work on strength and conditioning because she's
She gets beat
unfortunately
up.
a lot of
Yeah.
licks in Liverpool, so she needs to figure out a way how to handle it without having to get injured because we need her at her best because I think there's so much to come from her,
Mhm.
but I worry with again the amount of like some of the licks are just ridiculous that she's getting, but at the same time, it's like if they're not going to call it, she's got to find a way to
Yeah.
be able to in an unfair way. She's got to find a way to physically take it. Until like you think with the club, you know, having to reach out to the league and say, look at the like it's getting ridiculous now, and
Mhm.
having enough of proof that these aren't like her faking, like you're seeing the after images. Come
Mhm.
on. So hopefully that gets sorted out sooner rather than later because um excuse me, she's just getting beat up out there.
She is.
And at first I thought it was like more like is she just not tough enough, but now it's just like they're targeting her, right?
Mhm.
Because almost like she's a threat and eliminate her and that changes their attack.
No, it really does, and so it sucks, like you said. It sucks that the only thing is she, that either these refs change or we're gonna put her on some muscle and endurance plan so that she can take the licks. But it sucks. But I mean, I think a lot of for Stony, a lot of what and how they will set up and the players that they have, I think really will rely on where she thinks she can get the best out of Olivia Smith. Not that the team runs through her, but I think where you play her kind of starts to push other positions into order in that
Yeah.
sense, right? Because like I do wonder with even like a player like Nichelle with Casey, not to say that Nichelle hasn't been a good player. I was messaging someone I it was like I think these next few years, we're going to have a conversation about the legacy of what players did versus their actual form. Because I am high on the kids that are coming and some of the players who are starting to come into their own as players. And if you want to start to integrate those players in, you're going to have conversations with players who've been part of the program for years now and say, it's not a lifetime achievement award. It's a are you playing up to that standard that requires you to be here? If yes,
And
by all means. If no,
in an ideal world, you start to have multiple camps with multiple different areas, right? So that you're
mhm,
not always overlapping the same players all the time,
mhm,
right? Having a European-based camp, having like a North, maybe a larger North American camp, so you can get a better read on a larger player pool.
yes,
And I think you may see a shift in how recruitment is done for on our women's side because I think it sounds like and all the things I've seen is that like it's a joint effort between the head coaches for both programs to
mhm,
learn from each other, bounce ideas off of each other, and find ways to grow Canada soccer as a whole versus just one team versus another.
yes, agreed. And I think we'll see that coming through, and then just seeing they have a year. The women have a year basically to play before they have to play any competitive matches. So I I for one would love to see Casey Stoney just say, hey, for this camp, Jesse, Shalina, Khadijah, assuming you're healthy, go to Cabo, take it off. You're good. Let's see some other players come through. We don't need to have them all be there and run it through.
You know what'd be nice is if you could have camps where there's no FIFA games involved, where you
Hmm.
can go play friendly against maybe one of the NSL teams, where what you're allowing is you're not worrying about points. You're
Hmm.
focusing on player development, giving younger players an opportunity, right?
Hmm.
It's the way soccer's now structured. Every game kind of does have some form of importance to it, right? So you
Yes.
can't always put out uh you can no longer say put out a C roster just for the sake of putting out a C roster,
Yeah.
right? Every game matters, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Unless it's again, like I said, something that is a during a non FIFA window, and you're just playing uh, closed door friendly, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Do you think
so,
the program would
anyways,
benefit with having a U23 side to kind of look at some of the younger players more in their group, or just
yep.
there once you pass U20s, get them into the senior team type of a thing?
It definitely. I think both programs would have a better because I think what happens is there is a U23 program strictly for the men, only for the Olympics.
Yes.
Outside of that, they don't really play any other games, right?
Hmm.
Europe plays more of a U21. I think we play more of a U20. But I think we need to have a U23, um, whether it be a World Cup, whether it be a youth tournament, like there should be youth tournaments for that level. Because
Yes.
I think what's happening is obviously if you're good enough to, at 17, 18, 19, 20 to go play professional, go play for your country, go ahead,
Hmm.
right? But there's players that are late bloomers
Yeah.
and maybe keeping them at least within the national team's vision, maybe, you know, they just didn't develop the same way his padre did. Yeah, his 21-year-old friend is on the national team, but
Yeah.
this guy, like, he's got something, but but he gets a chance to play, and then he's still, building that up because he's probably playing professional anyways,
Yeah.
right? I don't know. In this country, it's already difficult having, for our teams to do anything from a financial standpoint. So, um, it will be interesting to see between now and the next couple World Cups, not just the men's, but even the women's, how
Yeah.
things, if we see a shift in how they generate funding.
Hmm. It will be. And I mean, Blue's done a good job so far in terms of finding, I guess, outside of the traditional norms of fundraising. I mean, when he was hired, that's where I was like, well, fundraising sponsorships, he's clearly here to find funding for things. Now, can that be sustainable on a wider frame? We'll wait and see.
That
But
and that worries me. Because I think what a lot of the hope is to propel the enthusiasm from the World Cup as on a national stage, and
yeah.
businesses will just want to get on board,
Hmm.
right? Like I think in the next year you're going to start to see from a marketing standpoint, advertising standpoint, a big push because again, you want like it would if you're a Canadian if business and the World Cup's coming here, would you not want to associate your business with that
Of
event?
course, you would want to.
Right. And then some of the deals will be long-term type of sponsorship or
Yeah.
arrangements or, we'll see how there's like Canada Soccer has so many other things that like they've got on their plate. So it'll be interesting to see how things develop on so many fronts. But yeah, I think the women play again tomorrow, is it? Their final game?
Yeah, they play tomorrow, their final game. There's because that will so Tuesday the 25th they play Chinese Taipei. The U17s or no, the U20s play Trinidad to qualify for their next championship round. You have U17 groups were set for that. A lot of announcements are coming through, but yeah, we'll kind of take a look at it and see where it goes. But I've liked what I've seen so far from the with Casey Stoney so far, but I've also said I'm looking at players, so I'm seeing what you are trying to do, who you're trying to see, and from a experimentation standpoint, she gets full marks from me. Now I'm just curious to see kind of what's able to happen. I think the fan base needs like a good win. I saw a comment the other day where like we got a win over an inferior team when they played Mexico, and I was just like, um. I don't think Mexico is that inferior, guys. I think Mexico's a lot closer to you guys than you want to admit
That had to be somebody who hasn't been paying attention to the women's game as of late, right?
there. Mhm.
Because Mexico is definitely a team that if we're not paying close attention, they're going to get that win from, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And like the
So,
Mexico's been the side that's done well, and stylistically they fit that way. So it's like don't look at this from a standpoint of, oh, we've always beat them. This because we're gonna have the same conversations on the men's side when it's like, oh, Mexico always beats Canada. It's like, no, if you've been paying attention, it's a lot closer than you realize. So give respect to what they're doing, because
no,
Mexico is coming on the women's side. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But you know, this is what happened, Sean. We say we'll have a short conversation, and we reach the hour mark, and we're like, well, we talk. We're talkers. That's what we do.
yeah.
So before we wrap this up, what do you have going on with your different platforms? You have the Tunnel Club. Anything else that we should know that we can kind of keep an eye on for you going on there?
Well, when it comes to YouTube, obviously there's the EPL recap
Mhm,
show on the 6 Yard Line podcast, which um, next episode will probably drop Wednesday. I think we're recording tomorrow.
mhm.
Um, Scheduling wise for me and Noel sometimes doesn't always match up the best way we best for timing as of late. Um, the Tunnel Club, yeah, we first, obviously TFC had their first game, so we did the post game show right after. We'll follow that up this Saturday again with post game after that. Um, Hopefully there's improvements this season when it comes to the Reds.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be too pessimistic or too negative. Trying to find there was some positives with their style of play on Saturday. The fact that they fought till the end, they were able to, being down twice, draw the game. Um, so I'll take that. So
Mhm.
basically, yeah, that's where you'll find me right now. When it comes to the women's game, yes, there is the AFC Toronto, or sorry, we are AFC Toronto podcast, which has been on a brief hiatus. I know the ladies were looking to do another episode. Scheduling hasn't worked out, so we'll see when that
Yeah.
happens again. Um, and again, like I said, that my long term goal is to do, jump on once in a blue moon and just kind of more produce.
No, for
So
sure.
I think the next episode I will probably be faceless, just be behind the scenes, but we'll see how things go. As I said, I kind of chosen not to be part of the supporters group for a variety of reasons, but one is just is I just can't really. I've got too much going
Time.
on.
Yeah.
Um, Especially with all this and at the end of the day, I've also realized is like, you know what? If there's ever a day there's a conflict between AFC and Toronto FC, I'm not skipping a TFC game.
And you'll make those choices, and you kind of go from there. I get the funny thing is, the longer we do this, the more you realize it's like I would talk to on the rise all the time and be like, anytime news breaks, you're just like, well, got to get back and produce. And after a while, you're just like, I don't really have time to be anything but this. So like, I understand the aspect of like having to choose and prioritize and such. So no, I get it. I get it totally. But yeah, well, you guys will see pieces of this as it goes through. Thank you again. You'll find all his information in the description below, both on podcast form and on YouTube, guys. Enjoy this. It is Monday night. There's 5 minutes left in this Jamaica Nicaragua U20 girls match. Nicaragua just tied this in the 88th minute, so I'm going to watch the end of this and I'm going to enjoy this. And for
You
everyone else,
had to
guys,
you had to do that to me. You had to. The Reggae girls
listen.
have not been playing, have been disappointing me. Um, in the U17, I was disappointed with how they ended up. Not, I thought they were going to take their group.
Mm.
So I was disappointed with that, and now you're hearing now this result. So
Hey, 3 minutes left,
yeah,
2 minutes left in this, man. There could be hope, or there will just be despair. Who knows? I will tell you what I'm rooting for. I'm rooting for chaos. But guys, we'll wrap it up from here. And as always, I'm gonna stop talking right here.